Cool. So that's 7 o'clock. So we're going to kind of start and set up this stream pretty much similar to the last one. So if you haven't seen the last one, it was on about goal setting and work-life balance. So it was roughly about 30 minutes in duration, and we had a nice Q&A afterwards. But to get us started off, we'll just do a little intro in terms of what Premier Endurance actually is. So a little bit about me. As you can see, this is me in the little box here. My name is Jamie Blanchfield. I race road bikes. I have some fun doing cyclocross, and I love gravel riding. Seems to be the in thing at the moment. I have a Bachelor of Science in Sports Coaching and Performance from Waterford. And I'm a qualified cycling Ireland coach as well. Specialise mainly in road and time trial coaching, with kind of a variety from complete beginner athletes up to professional and continental level, and then I coach some track and some cyclocross, as well as some kind of triathlon and duathlon too. I'm the head coach at Premier Endurance, and I'm a development coach and consultant with Cycling Ireland, so we're mainly working with kind of youth and junior athletes there. This is something I did in the last talk as well, and I just ran through and walked through my coaching philosophy, okay? And I think this really shapes it up for like how I kind of give these presentations or webinars, whatever you want to call them, and how I actually approach coaching athletes too, if any of you are looking to get to know me a little bit better. So you can kind of read it here, but the development of self-sufficient athletes by aiding and educating them in every way along their journey, okay? So stuff like this is really key, and I think the athletes that I work with would testify to the fact too that I'm very engaging in terms of the kind of why of the training. And then my definition of success would therefore be when an athlete has taken the time and initiative to work on their weaknesses regardless of whether they improve or not. So a little bit controversial maybe. I'm not massively outcome orientated. I'm very much engaged in the process of kind of continuous small steps forward in our fitness and our psychological skills and our general kind of tactical knowledge in road racing or pacing behaviors in triathlon and that type of thing. But ultimately through this background work, success will come in the form of race results and personal bests, and hopefully a long lasting love for the sport as well, because that's key really at the end of the day. You need to like what you're doing. So what is Premier Endurance then? Okay, so it was founded in 2018, August, drawing on experience from multiple domains and areas. So like I say, from an educational standpoint, what we discussed a little bit earlier in the previous slide, and then from kind of just my own coaching experience up through volunteer club coach, and helping out friends and, getting coached myself and racing at kind of a national level, and international occasionally, not very successfully. The main business then, I suppose, is coaching both performance and practical hands-on work, okay? Athletes, like we say, ranging from recreational to professional level, and other services include club days. Usually I do these type of talks with actually a group of audience in front of me, not just the blank wall that's actually behind this webcam. Lactate profile testing, consultations, among a host of other things, okay? So if anyone wants to know anything more about the services we offer and so forth, just touch base with me. The contact details are underneath my lovely face here. So onto the juicy stuff then, the outline of the webinar. What is recovery? Okay. What are the popular methods of recovery, popularized in the media and by athletes that we respect and know about? The evidence behind those and the mechanisms. So how do they actually work? And then a Q&A. So like I said, the presentation will be much similar to last time, kind of 30 to 45 minutes. Type questions as you go in the comment box for during. I'll try to do my best to answer them as they come in, and then afterwards as well. We have a few questions that kind of come in on email and through Instagram question box earlier on too, for people that wouldn't be able to make the presentation. So I think best to just go straight into it. I'm getting a bit quicker at these introductions. So recovery and endurance sport, okay? What is recovery? So this kind of popularized image you see on the right hand side here is the stress adaptation cycle, okay? So when we train, we're going from baseline underneath it, okay? And that's called a fatigue state. So we're dropping below our baseline. As we recover, we come back up to our baseline, and then as we recover slightly more and back off the training, we actually go above baseline, and that's usually a taper, and that's when we race. Okay, so this kind of adaptation cycle, you can apply it to kind of a daily or what we call a micro cycle or a macro cycle or a week, or a month. It kind of rings true for all the specific training cycles. Okay, so you apply stress to the body, you adapt, you get better, but the key thing here is this little recovery section. Okay, there's lots of tips and tricks that can influence how quickly you return to that baseline, right? And we're going to discuss, when we should use them, and maybe the positives or negatives of using them within a training cycle versus competition and so forth. It is important to note that we're not talking about the training recovery balance here, rather the interventions that you can do to aid recovery. Okay, so when I talk about a training recovery balance, that's kind of something for you and your coach to look to. Okay, so how you outline your weeks of training, where they fit in amongst work, if you're working full-time athlete, that type of thing. That's for you and your coach to do, or you to take an objective look at yourself. These are really the specific interventions that we can do to actually influence and impact our recovery. Okay, so really this fatigue is, like I say, needed in the short term. So it can actually influence kind of something called overreaching. Okay, and what we want to get better essentially as bike riders or triathletes or endurance athletes in general is something called functional overreaching. Okay, so we're applying a stress to our body that we can kind of handle. It's going to elicit short-term fatigue, but after a few days easy, we rebound back to baseline and then hopefully above it. Okay, so really it's important to not branch into the domain of something we call non-functional overreaching, right? And that's when we're not going to get too specific with definitions here, but that's when, after multiple days of easy recovery, off days, rest days, even, multiple weeks, you're not returning back up to that baseline. Okay. And what we can kind of soundly say is a lot of these recovery interventions can actually help in this fine balance between kind of functional and non-functional overreaching, and then obviously our performance metrics as well in terms of competition. But just a quick caveat when it comes to this type of stuff, okay, marketing, popular media, and recovery interventions. Really, we need to be wary, okay, and a skeptical head is probably always a better head when it comes to this stuff, right? So you can see here, I hope I don't get done for copyright or anything, but Under Armour's athlete recovery sleep wear, Tom Brady's secret to recovery. Okay, so Tom Brady had the excellent idea of monetizing sleep, one of our key pillars of recovery. Okay, and fair play to him, because I'd say he sold a lot of his pajamas, but the pajamas worked on a premise of infrared rays for recovery. Now the science behind them is quite wishy-washy, but it just shows how popular media and high-profile athletes can actually influence how we think. So, like, the reason why I included the Olympic medal on the side is if you see an Olympic athlete after a race, jumping into a set of compression boots or down in a recovery shake, it's probably the next thing you're going to reach for your own recovery as well as an endurance athlete. So just being a little bit skeptical of these things, and hopefully this presentation will kind of show you how to actually be skeptical for them as well. So you can't really mention recovery methods without kind of touching on the placebo. Okay, so like this image on the side, give you a bottle of pills that says powerful medicine, you're probably going to think that it's powerful medicine. Okay, there was a nice quote from Shona Halson, and it's the research that I'll probably be quoting quite a lot because she's done massive work on recovery in sport out of the Australian Institute of Sport and a couple of other places as well. So Halson and Martin basically quote is saying, for scientists who investigate the performance enhancing effects of different interventions, so be it training, recovery, altitude, heat, supplements, there's a strong likelihood that research participants' beliefs and expectations noticeably shape their performance. Okay, so what does that really mean? It means if you believe something is going to happen, it often can, in terms of a training intervention or a recovery intervention, and oftentimes that belief is a very powerful thing. So it's not to be snubbed at. You know what I mean? If there's no ill effects and the placebo effect seems to be working for you as an athlete, then by all means fire ahead with it. But the issue is when you add marketing, like we talked about previously, athlete endorsements, and then highly competitive athletes, which we all probably are, looking for an edge, it creates the perfect environment for us to fall prey to these kind of marketing interventions and possible placebo effects from, say, high level athletes, and try to apply it down to ourselves as well. So it is a really interesting kind of topic in terms of the placebo effect, but really my key thing here is for us to just filter out the noise a little bit in terms of what the recovery interventions actually are. And at the end of the day, probably help you save a little bit of money and your hard-earned time as well, and putting it more into a research-backed, a more applicable recovery intervention. So how do we use recovery interventions in sport? Okay, so recovery interventions can be used on a daily, weekly and infrequent basis. So when I say daily, we're kind of talking about sleep or our nutrition, which we'll talk a little about later. A weekly basis, maybe some people pick one dedicated day to do a proper stretching session per week for their recovery, or an infrequent basis. So some people, maybe every 2 months, they go for a massage, a deep tissue massage to help with their recovery. Okay, so from my coaching standpoint, I encourage interventions throughout all of these timescales, okay? And usually what I just mentioned there would be fairly bang on to what we'd recommend to athletes. We also shift our priority during extensive blocks or multi-day races, okay? So what the actual training goals are at that time kind of dictates our recovery, and we will deep dive into that a little bit later in terms of possible interference of gains and so forth, okay? So the methods often depend on the equipment available, a really key thing there, okay? What your training goals are, like we said above, about extensive training blocks and multi-day races. Like we say, are you in competition? The type of training you're doing, are you doing some strength training as well? Among many, many other variables, okay? I suppose it is worth briefly touching on that during competition, our demand for recovery is slightly different, okay? We often don't want to recover from a stimulus during the competition, if that makes sense. So if we're racing a multi-day race, every day we want to return to baseline, if that's possible, okay? And that's what we'll do with the recovery interventions. But if we're training, we do want to, thinking back to that graph, we do want to elicit that little bit of fatigue to bring us below baseline slightly, to then allow an adaptation and a super compensation, as they say. And there is a couple of recovery interventions that may actually just interfere with that training process and training adaptation that you may be best use for competition over training itself. So popular methods then, this is kind of the juicy stuff and how they work in sport. Okay. Sleep. I think sleep is number one here, and it's kind of good we just start off with it. Okay, so Usain Bolt's quote is saying, sleep is extremely important for me. I need to rest and recover in order for the training I do to be absorbed in my body. Okay, now, maybe that's not really how it works, or maybe it is, but it's one of the world's top athletes, talking about how important sleep is. Okay, I actually used this slide in my last thing about work-life recovery balance as well. But it is worth re-mentioning it. There's a study came out in 2017, looked at sleep and injuries within an adolescent athlete population, okay, so younger athletes, and found that sleeping more than 8 hours reduced odds of injury by 61%, okay. I often don't put in like shock takeaways from research, but I think something like this is really worth actually highlighting, because people often think, sacrifice sleep for possibly an early morning session or whatever, whereas oftentimes that sleep is the fundamental building block of our actual recovery process, right? So how can we go about improving that sleep and the sleep quality and quantity? So this is a nice little infographic from Jan Lemore. YLM Sports Science is a good Google, and you can actually see all these type of infographics. It's excellent, all based on studies, so you can see the study in the bottom left. So a checklist for athletes to consider to enhance sleep. Okay, so quiet environment, goes without saying. Okay, maintain a room temperature around 18 degrees. You don't want it to be too hot, you don't want it to be too cold. So you need that middle ground. Ensure that bedding and clothing does not cause an environment that is too hot. Okay, so reinforcing the previous point. Sleep routine, a consistent time each night for falling asleep and to begin with and waking up as well. So making sure you're floating in around kind of 20 minutes, 30 minutes of when you're actually going to sleep and waking up every day. And that's something that really, really helps with loads of athletes that I work with and talk to. Okay, avoiding caffeine kind of goes without saying, and fluid ingestion leading up to sleep. Okay, but interestingly, not before a nap. Avoid the use of computer and TV before sleeping. So a lot of people will use blue light blockers, or else just kind of park the phone for half an hour before bed and take out a book. Okay. Napping no later than afternoon if that's what's actually you find it's influencing your sleep slightly. And then a kind of a catch-all of at least 7 hours sleep a night, drawn back to that previous study as well, and ensuring a dark room with no light source present if you're not afraid of the dark. So that's sleep. Okay, we need to bump the quality and the quantity of that and do everything in our power to do it. But nutrition, is another one of these fundamental blocks of recovery. I'm just going to throw it out as a caveat first. Okay, I'm not a nutritionist. Okay, obviously I've studied nutritional modules, and we have a nutritionist working with us, Evan Lynch. And these people, are the experts on it. So this isn't a nutrition presentation, okay? But it's just a few key takeaways that you can use to influence your recovery. Firstly, there's no magic diet that influences recovery. Don't follow fads. It's just simple as it's. There's no magic pill, as they say, that influences our recovery like this for this stuff. From my point of view as a coach and from nutritionists that I've talked to and research that I've read, ensuring you're not in an energy deficit is the biggest factor. Okay, so we talk a lot on Premier Endurance blog and on our Instagram about relative energy deficiency, okay, and just deficiency in sport from an energy point of view in general. And it just influences so many factors, but also our recovery as well. Okay, so it comes with the caveat that in periods of desired weight loss, ensuring your fueling sessions, okay, so before, during, and after sessions, you're fueling key strategies in around that and having a safe calorie deficit. So from my point of view, you're working with a nutritionist. The popularized recovery window, okay, so they often say 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes after a workout from an insulin point of view is the best place to uptake and absorb carbohydrate and protein. Okay, it's probably the safest bet when you're training seriously, right? There's lots of noise about train low and different types of refueling strategies after training, but if you're training seriously and in a big multi-day block or through a race, you want to take in this recovery window. Okay, so post intense sessions, taking in 4-to-1 ratio of carbohydrate to protein is desirable. Okay, so how does that look? It looks about 20 grams of protein to about 80 grams of carbs, right? Chocolate milk, like stuff like yogurt and granola, dairy products are really good. Dedicated recovery mixes and sachets. Okay, really important to emphasize here that we're not just looking for protein after intense endurance exercise. We need carbohydrates, and that's a trap a lot of people do tend to fall into. So carbs are key, after the intense exercise. In terms of hydration then, again, bringing up our infographic from Jan Lemur based on this study by Evans et al. In 2017. Okay, so optimizing the post-exercise rehydration strategy. Key thing is for me here really that you can actually, you can screenshot stuff like this, or I can send you links and that, and they're really good takeaways to, even put on your walls or like have a little printout or screenshot on your phone, that type of thing. So like number one, the volume of fluid is greater than that lost during exercise to allow for ongoing urine loss, right? So oftentimes people will weigh themselves before and after and see what they lose in kilograms and rehydrate 1.5 times that is one such strategy. Okay, so where possible, ingestion of large volumes in a short period of time should be avoided, and intake spread over a few hours. So don't just chug a load of water straight after the race. It's not the best thing to do. To achieve effective water restoration and to retain the ingested water, electrolytes lost must be replaced. Okay, so a lot of times you can get these electrolytes, as we'll see later, from external sources like the electrolyte tablets and dedicated rehydration mixes, and also our food. Okay, so addition of sodium, another electrolyte, at a concentration greater than that of sweat appears to be necessary, but a lower concentration may be effective if ingested in a larger volume. Okay, so making sure you have enough sodium intake after is really, really key, especially if you're a salty sweater. So the addition of carbohydrate and milk protein appears to be beneficial to the rehydration process due to the reduced rate of fluid uptake. Milk appears to be an effective rehydration drink because of its sodium, carbohydrate, and protein content. So, this isn't an advertisement for dairy, although it seems that way, but milk has a very good blend of amino acids and also electrolytes, and it naturally kind of contains that 4:1 ratio as well of carbs to protein. The addition of small amounts of alcohol to a rehydration drink does not appear to adversely affect the rehydration process. A lot of you might be happy with that, but it just comes with the caveat that drinks that are more than 2% alcohol are likely to impair rehydration. Okay, so we all know that's a fairly low kind of volume of alcohol. So just being smart and clever in around that is key. And then just touching on that electrolyte loss again, we're looking at plain water. It's not considered effective, but it is effective when it's drank in conjunction with a fully balanced meal. All right. So, active recovery, our third such kind of recovery intervention that's popularized. Okay, and this one is a really interesting one because, obviously, active recovery between intervals is key, but it's not really the topic of what we're talking about. Okay, so we're kind of talking about passive versus active rest days, along with cool downs from intense exercise, right? Interestingly, there's limited evidence from cool downs and active recovery rides and their efficacy in endurance sport, right? So they're such a widely popularized recovery method, and from a coaching standpoint I use them a lot as well, don't get me wrong, and from my own athletic pursuits I use them a lot too. I find them beneficial, okay, but it's not really backed up in the research. Now there is some beneficial effects reported on next day performance, okay, but kind of minimal, and accelerate recovery of blood lactate concentration. Okay, so blood lactate concentration and the recovery of that would kind of lend itself to that short-term feeling of spinning your legs after a race or after a hard workout, and the nice feeling of it. And that was shown by Van Horen and Peak in 2018. Okay. This study in 2009 actually suggested no benefit to active recovery sessions longer than 60 minutes, right? And I will interject with a caveat here: if you're trying to boost your overall volume of a week, turning that active recovery session into kind of 90 minutes can be a nice way of doing that. With possibly no negative effects if we're influencing our fueling strategies around that and we're looking at what actually happened in the previous few days training, okay? But if you're feeling bad for not spinning your legs for longer than 60 minutes, absolutely no worries there. Oftentimes it could only be 20 or 30 minutes is going to be most beneficial. Regarding intensity then, it should be low to moderate for these recovery rides. So if you're have a lactate test done underneath that aerobic threshold, or underneath you're talking underneath 4, 5 out of 10 type of area in RP. Yeah, so that's interesting. Our coffee stop cake and cake rides, is there actually much research backing them in terms of a physiological perspective? Probably not. But from a mental standpoint, sometimes getting out and spinning the legs can actually do us the world of wonders. And like I say, if we're adjusting for all other things, active recovery is a very good tool to use. Stretching. So I'd like to see some cyclists get into positions such as our friend on the right hand side there. But stretching is probably one of the most widely popularized methods for recovery. Okay, so it works on the premise that you're enhancing range of motion, okay, so movement around a joint, and reducing the muscle soreness itself from exercise, okay. But unfortunately, there's little to no evidence to support this. Why is that? It's kind of hard to quantify in terms of different thresholds of stretching, people's pain, different pain tolerances, different movements. And what is the actual outcome measure that they're looking for in the studies, if that makes sense. So it is hard to quantify and support stretching and recovery. What little evidence there is suggests stretching through pain-free motions to aid recovery. Okay, so not embarking on kind of that ballistic stretching or really kind of pulling and dragging at a muscle to aid recovery. It's not backed up from the science point of view. and there is actually some research that shows it can actually impair in performance acutely. Okay, so evidence to suggest that stretching can impair muscular strength acutely, right? So there is a good bit of research coming out that actually shows decreases in muscular strength kind of up to 60 minutes after a quick blast of static stretching. So that is a little caveat to note before maybe you're going out on your ride to do, you know, some high top end sprints or something that's going to require a lot of muscular strength, such as low cadence work or, you know, even a hilly endurance ride. Now this, you know, comes with the caveat that from a physiotherapy point of view, stretching is often advised to reduce injury risk possibly, or recover rehab injuries. Okay, but this isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about recovery from actual just endurance sport, and getting us back to that baseline from a physiological, psychophysiological perspective. Continuing on in the same vein then as foam rolling, as stretching, we talk about foam rolling. Okay, so foam rolling is used for self-myofascial release. Okay, so what's myofascial release? You might ask. The fascia is kind of a band of connective tissues. It kind of essentially holds our muscles in place, joins our muscles together, that type of thing. Oftentimes you get that feeling of kind of knots in your quad or something. You jump on the foam roller and you hang out on the knot for a while and it seems to release. Again, it works on the premise of increasing range of motion, as does stretching, aiding recovery of exercise-induced muscle damage. And importantly, it doesn't appear to have a detrimental impact on performance. And that's from a recent study as well, in terms of looking at foam rolling and recovery. Generally, the effect sizes in the studies are kind of moderate to small in terms of how foam rolling actually helps recovery. And it's really hard to come by research outside of the strength and conditioning domain. So actually looking at specific recovery, say for a runner or for a cyclist after a heavy training block, that type of research is hard to come by. What I will say from a coaching perspective is, you know, more athletes than not tend to really like and foam rolling as part of their recovery regime during kind of intense training blocks and how it makes them feel. And there is a massive element from a psychological perspective to this type of stuff too, as we'll see a little later with massage. So for me, foam rolling having no detrimental impact on performance, you know, and possibly kind of a small to moderate effect on recovery, it is worth including in your regime. And keeping on top of it too is absolutely key for stuff like injury prevention. And I'm sure a lot of physiotherapists will recommend a little bit of foam rolling as well. So massage then, okay, so essentially we've kind of moved from, you know, stretching motions yourself to kind of giving yourself a self massage and a foam roller to having someone else do it for you. Okay, so massage works on the thought that you're increasing blood flow to a muscle to aid in the clearance of a metabolic waste. Okay, so metabolites building up from muscular contractions during intense exercise hang around within the muscle, and you know it often causes that dead leg, heavy legged feeling that we refer to sometimes. However, there's little to no evidence that supports massage for recovery, and I think, you know, before that would have shocked people quite a bit, but it's after becoming a little bit more popularized now. There is suggestions that it kind of made in reducing muscular soreness, any damaged or injured muscles, but in general, like foam rolling, I suppose it's moderate to little effect sizes really. But from my point of view and from the research point of view, generally you need to opt for kind of a light massage in and around training, okay? Because oftentimes it can actually, you know, you can nearly elicit a little bit more muscle damage with the deep tissue massages, and it's a bit draining in terms of, you know, how you feel after it. I'm sure a lot of people would testify to that. So opting for the light massage in around heavy training or competition is really key there, and then possibly deep tissue massage to sort out injury risk and stuff afterwards, okay, and maybe aid in recovery. But from the research point of view and from my point of view, there's massive evidence to suggest that massage may aid in the psychological aspect, and we do know that the psychological aspect of recovery is as important, if not more important, than than the physiological aspect, okay. So I'm not sure if people can read this. Let's have a quick look. This study came out. It's kind of a meta-analysis looking at psychological variables of massage. Okay, so this was mostly light massage as far as I'm aware. Yeah, you can see it there, Swedish massage. So mostly light massage, progressive muscle relaxation type of things, and so forth. So they looked at outcome measures of psychological variables. Okay, so state trait, anxiety inventory. Okay, so what is that? Okay, so state anxiety is kind of the here and now, anxious thoughts or anxious feelings, and trait is kind of, you know, looking toward the future, I suppose, in terms of being anxious about upcoming competition, that type of stuff from a competitive athlete standpoint. And then they looked at salivary cortisol, different blood markers, profile of mood states, okay, perceived recovery, blood lactate, blood glucose even, and then performance outcome measures. Okay, so you can see on the right hand side the main results. If you can see that there's a lot of findings coming out that it's actually decreasing anxiety traits, having positive impacts on your profile of mood state. Okay, decreasing cortisol, which is our stress hormone, increase in range of motion, like we said earlier, and having some kind of positive effects on perceived recovery, so how better you feel after from a psychological perspective. Okay, so from a massage point of view, it is really important to note that there is possible mechanisms there of psychological recovery, as well as the limited mechanisms of physical recovery too, but just opting for that light massage in around competition and heavy training blocks is probably your best bet, and then going for the deep tissue stuff afterwards and outside of that. So yeah, moving on then from the kind of massage domain to hydrotherapy. Okay, so you can kind of put two and two together that hydrotherapy involves some sort of water therapy, right? Well, there are many kind of forms of hydrotherapy, countless to be honest with you. We're going to focus primarily on water immersion. Okay, so your popularized ice baths that people have been doing for years upon years. So I kind of chose cyclists here and triathletes from the study groups that I looked at to see the efficacy of this hydrotherapy stuff. And hydrotherapy is one of those avenues that, you know, we were chatting about earlier in terms of impacts on training adaptation, which we'll get into a little bit later. But a good few studies have shown, as you can see there, that the cold water immersion and contrast water therapy were more beneficial than hot water immersion or a pool session. Okay, so that's very interesting in terms of that, because a lot of athletes will work in the pool, maybe a light walk through a pool, or use hot water as a kind of a perceived recovery. But a lot of research is pointing towards cold water immersion, so you know it is uncomfortable, but the price to pay, and contrast water therapy as well. So again, like I said about Shona Halson earlier, in terms of the research on recovery, this method was popularized from one of her studies, as far as I'm aware, the cold water immersion protocol down here. So 10 to 15 degrees Celsius for 10 to 15 minutes. So very easy, 10 to 15 for 10 to 15. And interestingly, this study in a group of cyclists, it looked at TT and sprint cycling performance. You need to be contrasted up to shoulders, which is interesting for, like, say, an endurance athlete who primarily works lower body, their lower limbs. So there is, you know, mechanisms there possibly behind, like, kind of nervous system recovery and so forth. So yeah, up to shoulders, so fairly uncomfortable, but good. And you'll probably find that 10 to 15 degrees is probably a little deal warmer, if we can call it that, than what popularized ice baths would actually be. But contrast water therapy seems to kind of be coming out king here. So we're talking, again, same temperature range, 10 to 15 degrees, and then the hot part of the contrast, 36 to 40 degrees, so in around our body temperature, in a 1-to-1 ratio. Okay, so finishing in cold water usually, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is in a minute. And for 6 to 12 minutes total time range. So what would that look like? Possibly, if we're talking only the lower end of it, 6 minutes, you're kind of going, you could kind of even go a minute on, minute off, minute on, minute off, up to kind of that 6 time mark. Whereas from the 12 minutes, you can look at kind of 2 minutes on and 2 minutes off, and that type of stuff as well. The reason why we finish in cold water, okay, especially if we have competition coming up, is that we don't want to kind of elevate heart rate or sweat rate or anything like that too. So the cold water does kind of help cool you off slightly in that regard. So yeah, that's hydrotherapy, but this all does come with the caveat that there's a big grey area here for training adaptation, and this is where it gets really interesting. Okay, from my point of view, from a coaching point of view, and from what the research says, I probably would avoid the cold water immersion during periods of heavy training when your goal is to increase adaptation. Okay, because there's a bit of research that's coming out saying that it actually can blunt our training response and adaptation in terms of a lot of training elicits kind of inflammation, we'll call it, and oxidative stress. And what the cold water immersion can do is it kind of blunt that adaptation from that standpoint. Okay, and we're talking minute details here, but you know, it could have some efficacy within the sports recovery domain. What I would say with this contrast water therapy and cold water immersion is during competition, this stuff is really proven to work. Okay, so it's definitely something that could be included during the competition phases. Excuse me. So that's our hydrotherapy. Compression then, no affiliation to Normatec, but these are the most popularized boots, along with Air Relax, I think is the brand. And these boots kind of work on a premise of enhanced muscle pump. Okay, so pumping blood flow through the muscles, clearing metabolites, similar to massage. Okay, now you don't need the boots and so forth to get a compression effect. There's socks, there's calf sleeves, there's full length leggings, a whole range of things actually. And there is quite a good deal of controversy in terms of pressure, of the actual compression garment, time of treatment, so how long you should have it on, and type of garment. Okay, so are you using boots, are you using calf sleeves, are you using full length leggings, what are you using to maximize the benefit? There is evidence again that it has a moderate effect, such as the other variables we discussed earlier on delayed onset muscle soreness. So if you do a heavy gym session, that feeling you get after it, muscle strength and power, performance outcome measures, perceived recovery again from a psychological aspect, and creatine kinase, which is a metabolite within the blood, within the muscle, that comes from protein breakdown within the muscle. And a lot of the research points for kind of high pressure of the compression garment for muscle performance, so that strength and power element of it. Okay, so is that applicable for, say, our endurance performance? I'm not sure. Probably a little bit more research needed. As you say in the same study by Hale, it's unclear evidence for the clearance of metabolites and decreasing soreness itself. Okay, so that is an interesting topic. One thing I would say is there's no apparent downfalls or pitfalls of wearing compression garments, which is the main thing. Okay, if you choose to do them, and probably best protocol would be to wear them for 60 minutes, kind of get them on as quick as possible and wear them in that 60-minute window post exercise. And there is a lot of studies that show people wearing them kind of for 24 hours post exercise as well, having good favorable performance outcome measures. But is that feasible? Possibly not. So when we look at these boots or whatever, probably doing a 40-60 minute session on the boots, it's not going to hurt, and there is a little limited evidence for the above mechanisms as well. So nearly coming to the end now of our the popularized recovery mechanisms. But the sauna is another one, interestingly enough, and I suppose maybe it's culturally dependent, where you're from, but typically we all kind of know what a sauna is: hot, dry environment, 80 to 100 degrees Celsius, right? So generally it comes with a caveat: they're safe for healthy individuals, but if you have heart complaints or various medical issues, you probably need to consult a doctor before using the sauna. But the good news is they're probably not good for your recovery anyway. Research kind of generally points to the avoidance of them, especially in the immediate aftermath of exercise. Okay, so it's kind of due to exactly how you're going to feel in a sauna, right? So that increase in heart rate, sweat rate, you're coming out soaked, and core temperature. Generally, after exercise, we want to bring our heart rate down, we want to bring our core temp down, we want to bring our sweat rate down. And by jumping in the sauna, we're possibly doing the opposite. Okay, there is also some little bit of research showing that use of saunas can increase cells called free radicals, okay, and overall increasing kind of the antioxidants effect within the body, and it kind of then lowers that oxidative effect of our training stimulus that has been applied. Okay, so using them as a recovery method is, it's questionable in terms of our actual training response too. But then on the other hand, you have research coming out that there could be apparent benefit to sauna use over a longer term because of the increase in training adaptation from an added stimulus point of view. Okay, so kind of a contradiction there from my reading of the research in terms of how people actually use these things. So if you think about doing your endurance ride and then you're jumping into a sauna for maybe 10-20 minutes afterwards, you're increasing your heart rate, sweat rate, you're nearly prolonging the effect of the endurance exercise. So that's, it's an interesting area to kind of read up on. But for recovery of exercise performance, no, not at all. Saunas are not it. And then the fancy things, okay? So I remember Leicester, when they won the league, they were everyone was talking about their cryotherapy chamber from a sports science point of view and a lot of stuff they were doing, okay? So there is research suggesting this type of stuff works, such as this flotation tank down the right hand side here, and also the kind of electronic stimulation too, in terms of muscle recruitment patterns and such. But overall, for the real fancy stuff, more research is often needed. It's not conclusive, and it's very expensive, and it's inaccessible. Okay, so not getting caught up in the marketing hype, bringing it right back to where we started on. There isn't a magic bullet. Just do the basics right. So yeah, it's just kind of wrapping it up. I think the key thing with things like this is being your own scientist, okay? Like with some of this stuff, assess the risk reward. Is there apparent negatives like the sauna, or, is there an influence on your training adaptation like the cold water immersion? What's the risk? What's the reward? See, does it work for you then? Okay, so see, are your kind of perceived recovery, is it up, or are your numbers up out your run or your ride? For me, my takeaways would be sleep and nutrition come before everything else, your daily tools. Okay, that's what I drill home to every athlete. Like, if you don't have your nutrition dialed and you don't have your sleep dialed, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. A common research-backed recovery protocol during a multi-day stage race, I thought this was a cool infographic. I said I'd pop it up, and it looks a little something like this. So hopefully you guys can see that on the screen there. So obviously going from left to right, you can kind of read it along yourself, but 1 is the end of the race. Cool down, then maybe 10 to 15 minutes of low intensity exercise, so bringing it into what we were talking about. In terms of the cool down itself, decreasing that perceived or increasing perceived recovery, or clearing lactate from the bloodstream. Hydrating beverage, so yeah, drilling home the 1.5 litres per kilo of body mass loss, okay, with 60 millimoles per litre of sodium, okay, so ensuring just that sodium intake. Having a snack, your 80 grams of carbohydrate, 30 grams of protein here suggested. Compression socks, okay, on the way to the hotel, so what I was talking about, that kind of 60-minute-ish post window of recovery. Dinner, easily digestible, low in fat. Okay, so this is about a multi-evening competition performance in cycling, so they're actually looking at a 6-day event, interestingly enough. So that nice balanced meal, fueling for tomorrow. Cold water immersion, 15 degrees for 15 minutes, so like we were saying, 10 to 15 for 10 to 15. You could also possibly do contrast water bathing there. Minimize electronic device use. What's that to do? It means we're maximizing sleep, okay, like I was referring to earlier. Pre-sleep beverage, then we're talking protein intake in terms of casein and tart cherry juice. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of supplement use here. That's a totally different topic. And then mental recovery techniques, some efficacy, haven't really talked about them, but from a point of view of kind of mindfulness techniques, meditation, breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, that type of stuff. And then sleep, thinking all the way back to the infographic at the start, how to promote a quiet, dark and cool environment for your sleep. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Actually really enjoyed researching and looking up that one, actually, in terms of the recovery metrics and methods, and seeing what actually works. And it kind of was eye-opening for me for some of the actual things as well. So if anyone has any questions, firstly, you can pop them in there and we'll address them as we go. And then I have one or two questions to be addressed that came off the Instagram live, like I was chatting about earlier on. So yeah, questions about anything, like anything at all in terms of recovery in your sport, or how to balance your training with recovery, or even if some of you guys missed last week's webinar and you want to ask a bit of questions on the kind of work-life balance, because this does feed into that a little bit, fire away and we can see what we can do. Also, like the last time, we left the email address open as well, so if anyone wanted to pop questions in terms of from an anonymous standpoint, you can fire an email, Jamie at Premier Endurance, and you can pop the question in over there as well. Everyone's quiet tonight, huh? Yeah, I'll kick it off anyway. So some of the questions that we got in from the Instagram question sticker was, one person asked recommendations for fitting in recovery after a late evening session. So oftentimes the late evening sessions are something that a lot of our kind of 9 to 5 athletes work on, and getting recovery in after them is sometimes difficult, because sometimes you're nearly sacrificing sleep. So yeah, number one for me is sleep. Okay, and if a session is breaching into that, pre-sleep window and it's influencing your sleep, do you really need to push that extra 20 minutes onto the session? Maybe not. Opt for optimized sleep is what I'll always say there. And likewise, if you're getting up really early, either adjust your going to bed time or bin the early morning session, from my point of view, especially if you're doing it time after time after time again, because it is sleep, it comes as a key thing here. Also, in terms of nutrition, like when's the timing of your meals in terms of where you're actually placing that training, that's really, really crucial as well. So oftentimes people will come in from work, they'll have their meal, they'll wait an hour, they'll be on the bike for kind of 7:30, 8, they'll do an hour, they'll be over by 8:30, 9 o'clock. Some people don't like eating late at night, but you'll need to get refueling in if it's been a tough session. If it's been a tough session, sorry, now there's just the audio stream is lower than the recommended audio stream better. Yeah, it seems maybe having some audio issues, so if anyone can kind of let me know if you can hear me, that's fine, but we'll crack on regardless. Yeah, so sleep and nutrition. So getting in your recovery after your training is really good, and there is some research there pointing to casein protein intake overnight for recovery too. So that might be something to look at, as well as maybe incorporating that cool down element to decrease that perceived or increase the perceived recovery, and clear lactate out of the muscle. So if it means sacrificing maybe last interval and opting for a little bit more of an extended cool down, if that's what actually makes you feel better, to wind down a little bit, that could be an idea as well. yeah, so I hope that answers your question. Let's go have a quick look at the audio. One more question. Yeah. Yeah, so if anyone else has any more questions, pop them in. The other question we got in on Instagram was how many days training before a recovery day? Hard one to answer off the cuff without knowing you as an athlete. So yeah, it kind of comes up to my first point, I suppose, on that question is it's highly individual. But I will give you some tips in terms of what I do with athletes. I generally work on kind of 3 and 4 day rotating blocks sometimes with people who are full time on the bike, we'll say. So those 3 days on will make up, endurance rides or structure, whatever, and then they'll have a recovery and then they'll go into a 4 day block and possibly another recovery day into another 4 day block, that type of thing. Just from working with athletes, I have found that the 3 days, especially if there's intensity in it, is probably enough of a block to then allow for a recovery day afterwards, and a recovery day is needed. And 4 days will push the envelope a little bit more. So that's from, say, my own point of view. And then I suppose you do need to look at your individual response in terms of, say, training cycles. So like if you're planning maybe 2 or 3 week training block, do you respond better to maybe 4 weeks with slightly less intensity and then taking your recovery afterwards? And I appreciate that this isn't really a coherent answer, because unfortunately it's so individual determined that it's kind of hard to give a coherent answer. But generally, I think monitoring aspects of internal and external loads, so stuff like your resting pulse in the morning, or even that profile and mood state that we referred to earlier about the massage, like how are you feeling on a day-to-day basis, where's the motivation levels at, and then monitoring aspects of external loads, such as your power output on the bike or your running pace or a track session, something like that. And kind of coordinating all these little things and seeing if there's a trend in them, right? And then taking your recovery day can work too. Heart rate variability is another tool in that toolbox often. And there is a lot of kind of other monitoring tests and stuff that we can do from a coaching standpoint. But we won't get into them. So yeah, it kind of depends, unfortunately. It depends on you as an individual athlete. It depends. I got another question in on Instagram there. I raced for 5 seasons, is 6 years off the bike and recovery. Might be a little bit too much recovery. Yeah, so if anyone has any more questions, fire them in there now, because I'll be closing up the stream soon enough. And obviously the stream, the best thing about YouTube, I suppose, is that the stream will stay up afterwards, which is quite nice. And you can kind of rewatch back over if you wanted a screenshot or grab any of the stuff I put up. But if anyone has any questions about anything, just feel free to pop me an email there, or follow us on any social media, and we'll touch base in with you and send on whatever is needed. Can you put back up the recovery for the stage race? Yes, I can do that. There you go. So hopefully that's coming out clear for you guys. If it's not, by all means, I'll send it over. Like I say, YLM Sports Science, and hop onto the website, and you'll get a nice downloadable copy of it. I think I actually have a blog over in Premier Endurance on this one too. So if you hop over to the website, there's a blog wrote on that as well, in terms of how we can recover after a stage race based on that paper itself. In a longer form manner, if anyone's interested in reading that. Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up there then, if that's the case, and no more questions to run through. So thanks everyone for tuning in to the second webinar on recovery, and hopefully we'll continue on these. There's a few more topics that we have in mind, and hopefully you can get someone else other than me as well onto the old webinar, and we'll chat through some stuff too. But yeah, until next time, hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and we can talk to you soon.